Greetings, Patriots, Renegade here or R, as I signed my Facebook post. I'm sure I will be pissing some of you off with this new video and topic. This video was suggested by a viewer. We shall call them JP. This is a topic that gets overlooked in the Patriot movement. In this video, I will be discussing transgender rights. Now, before you bearded fellers start raising hell and cussing and saying there are only two genders, I want to stop your ass right there and just listen for a little while. Most of you know I was a former national commander. I've met many people from all walks of life throughout my 30 years of being in the Patriot movement. I've had members confide in me that they were gay or even bi. We talk about our constitutional rights, but have you just ever thought about theirs? Have you really just thought, what if it was you in their shoes? Here's somewhat why I am making this video. Many years ago, I had a co-commander whose son was going through all of the changes. I personally saw how it affected him and his kids. I saw how he was so ashamed of him. I mean, people, that's your son or daughter. No need to turn your back on your own kids. To me, that's sorry. You should always support your own flesh and blood. Sure, that boy is not going to grow up being like his dad, full bearded, wearing the wraparound sunglasses with the look at me mentality. This is something that is not discussed in the Patriot community because it is like that former co-commander. They are ashamed or afraid people will think of them as bad parents. I'm sure he is not the only one in the movement who has a kid, gay, bi, or trans. This is way more common than you might think. I'm sure right now you know a kid going through this. Some call it a disorder, a sin. Well, it is not. Who they are, and it's how God made them. All gay, bi, trans people out there are not going to eat your kids or some other shit. They're not going to try to change them or influence. I mean, you all worry about predators on social media. Well, for one, an 8-year-old don't need no damn phone. That goes back to a bad parent. Look, the transgender people come from all walks of life. They are dads, moms, brothers, and sisters, some daughters. They are your co-workers and your neighbors. The word transgender or trans is an umbrella term for people who identify a gender is different from the sex assigned to them at birth. Although the word transgender and the modern definition of it only comes into the use in the late 20th century. People who would fit under this definition have existed in every culture throughout recorded history. Despite the increased visibility of transgender celebrities like Laverne Cox or writer Janet Mock, many Americans still don't personally know anyone who is transgender. But the number who do is growing rapidly. According to a 2016 survey commissioned by the Human Rights Campaign, 35% of likely voters in the United States personally know or work with somebody who is transgender. This is more than double the 17% who answered yes when asked the same question a year ago. The other research suggests that there are at least 700,000 transgender people in the United States, about 0.3% of the total population, and about 3.5% of the LGBTQ community. These estimates are likely conservative because of the limited amount of studies that have attempted to measure the transgender population. What does it mean to be transgender? The transgender community is increasingly diverse. Some transgender people identify as male or female, and some identify as genderqueer, non-binary, or agender, or somewhere else on or outside the spectrum of what we understand the gender to be. Some of them take hormones and some have surgeries as part of their transition. Some don't. Some choose to openly identify as transgender while others simply identify as men or women. In a survey of LGBTQ youth, about 10% of the respondents identified themselves as either transgender or other gender and wrote in identities like genderqueer, gender fluid. This suggests that a larger portion of this generation's youth are identifying somewhere on the broad gender spectrum. In many ways, transgender people are like non-transgender people, but because of their social stigma surrounding the transgender identity, their community faces a unique set of challenges. What challenges do transgender people face? While the visibility of transgender people is increasing in popular culture and daily life, they still face severe discrimination, stigma, and inequity. Some of the specific issues facing the transgender community are as follows: lack of legal protection. While the federal government, Equal Unemployment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, and the Department of Education have taken steps to include transgender people under existing non-discrimination protections, there is still no comprehensive non-discrimination law that includes gender identity. According to the Human Rights Campaign, only 18 states and the District of Columbia prohibit employment from a housing discrimination based on gender identity. Only 17 states and the District of Columbia prohibit discrimination based on gender identity in public accommodation, and 15 states and the District of Columbia prohibit discrimination based on gender identity in education. Moreover, state legislatures across the country are debating, and in some cases, passing legislation specifically designed to prohibit transgender people from accessing public bathrooms that corresponds with their gender identity, or creating exemptions based on religious beliefs that would allow discrimination against LGBTQ people. Now, poverty. In too many cases, this lack of legal protection translates into unemployment for transgender people. The National Transgender Discrimination Survey, or NTDS from here on out, found that 15% of the respondents were living in a severe poverty, making less than $10,000 a year. For transgender people of color, those rates were even higher, with 34% of Black and 28% of Latino respondents reporting a household income of less than $10,000 a year. As anyone who had experienced poverty or unemployment understands, being unable to afford basic living necessities can result in homelessness or lead people to engage in underground economics like drug sales or survival sex work, which can put people at increased risk for violence and arrest. Now, harassment and stigma. The LGBTQ community still faces considerable stigma based on over a century of being criticized as mentally ill, socially deviant, and sexually predatory. While these flawed views have faded in recent years for the lesbian and gay men, transgender people are still often met with ridicule from a social society that does not understand them. This stigma plays out in a variety of contexts, leaving them vulnerable to lawmakers who attempt to leverage anti-transgender stigma to score cheap political points to family and friends or co-workers who reject transgender people upon learning about their transgender identities, and to people who harass, bully, and commit serious violence against transgender people. Anti-transgender violence. On a report I obtained, at least 13 transgender women were murdered in 2014. The future is on track to see even higher numbers. These women were stabbed, shot, strangled, burned, killed violently by intimate partners. According to a 2013 National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs, NCAVP, from here on out, report on hate violence against lesbians, bisexual, transgender, queer, and HIV-infected communities. 72% of the victims of LGBTQ or HIV-motivated hate violence homicides in 2013 were transgender women, and 67% were transgender women of color. Transgender people have few options for protecting themselves from violence and or seeking justice. The NTDS found that 22% of transgender people who had interacted with police experienced a bias-based harassment from police, with transgender people of color reporting much higher rates. 6% reported physical assault, 2% reported sexual assault by police, and 20% reported having been denied equal services by law enforcement. Nearly half of the transgender people surveyed in this study said they were uncomfortable with turning to the police for help. Now, barriers to healthcare. Data collection on healthcare providers among transgender people is very limited. But the data we do have reveal a healthcare system that is not meeting the needs of the transgender community. In a 2012 needs assessment by the Washington, D.C. Times Trans Coalition, 44% of those who identified as one of their top priorities to transgender-sensitive healthcare was their most significant need. Beyond facing barriers to obtain medically necessary health services and encountering medical professionals who lack transgender health care competency, and the NTDS found that almost 20% of the respondents had been refused medical care outside because of violence. Now, identity documents. The widespread lack of accurate identity documents among transgender people can have an impact on every area of their life, including access to emergency housing or other public services. To be clear, without identification, one cannot travel, register for school, or access many services that are essential to function in society. Many states require evidence of a medical transition, which can be very expensive and is not something that all transgender people want, as well as fees for processing new identity documents, which may make them unaffordable for some members of the transgender community. The NTDS found that among these respondents who have already transitioned, 33% had not been able to update any of their identity documents to match their affirmed gender. While advocates continue working to remedy these, change cannot come too soon for transgender people. Now, visibility, especially positive images of transgender people in the media and society, continue to make a critical difference for them. But visibility is not enough, and it comes with real risk to their safety, especially for those of them who are part of a marginalized community. This is why the Human Rights Campaign is committed to continuing to support and advocate for the transgender community, so that the transgender Americans who are and will become your friends, neighbors, co-workers, and family members have an equal chance to succeed and thrive. Now, knowing all this, I want you to think, what if it was your son or daughter going through this? Again, this is something that most people do not talk about in the movement, other than to put it down or bang on your tight chest. If you are in the movement and you have a kid facing this, just know you're not alone. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I have seen so much over my years as a commander. I feel this is the one topic that is so taboo to discuss in the movement, but it is something we must discuss. By now, you all know I call things like I see them. I'm sure I done pissed some of y'all, but you know what? I don't care if it hurts your feelings. Now, I don't want you to be crying or posting bad comments because, well, you know, how do you say it? A fucking snowflake? I will tell you this. I live in a very conservative state. No matter if someone is gay, bi, trans, or whatever they may be, if they have not done nothing wrong, but are in fear of their life because of who they are, I will defend them with whatever means necessary. They have rights also. Why? Because they are human. I know they will be people you will use the Bible to cherry pick what you may want to post, but a true Christian, you sometimes gotta love people no matter if you like what they do or how they dress. I have seen in recent months the Black Lives Matter, and in the Patriot Communities, you post all lives matter. So for once, practice what you preach and think about them. I want to leave you with my final thoughts before I go. Don't be so quick to post negative about the transgender movement. They are people just like you and me. You know, I am very family oriented. I have talked about how important family is in many of my videos. I don't lean to the left like you might think I do. I only want you to know that this is a much bigger problem than you think in the movement. If you have a problem with all this, just pray about it and ask God for help in finding the path for you. There's an old saying out there that goes like this: if you think you have problems, just sit down next to a stranger and talk. You will come to learn your problems are small compared to his. Again, Patriots, love one another. Godspeed. Renegade out.